Hi guys, and welcome back to another video. So we are going to be working in the sketchbook or notebook, whichever you like to call it. But basically last week I showed you guys the sketchbook tour of my previous sketchbook. So we are going to be finally starting on the first page of this new one. So I'm going to go ahead and take these binder clips and start to kind of pin down my page so it doesn't have too much buckling, because we are going to be doing mostly gouache painting for today's session. So I did do some thumbnail sketches on the back side of the page, but the ones that I'm going to be following are actually the ones that I did on the sticky note, just because for some reason, I don't know if I was in the right headspace, but I needed to do more sketches than I thought I needed to, so I used a sticky note to kind of fulfill that need to fix my sketches. So as usual, I skipped the sketching portions because it's harder for you guys to see, but it also gives me enough time for me to flesh out and plan everything that I need done. And I'll talk more about the layout and the theme of it a little bit later. So in terms of sketching, I am using my multi-pencil alongside with the 0.5 Uni Nano Dia color erasable lead in the color red, just because it's just a little bit easier for me to see on the page myself. I also have a kneaded eraser to pick up any excess, I guess like pigments and stuff afterwards. After that, we have watercolors because I'm going to be using that to kind of prep the colors and priming the page for my gouache. I'm specifically using this palette and the paint pans because it's a little bit easier and more condensed for me to use on my desk. After that, we have my HIMI gouache, which is basically the jelly gouache that a lot of people have been using. This is the 24 colors, and we'll be using that to paint for a majority of today's page. After that, I have one last thing actually. So this is the acrylic marker set from Arrtx, and I was planning to use this for the text. Now, I'll show you guys where I actually end up using it, but for now, let's just carry on with the actual process for today's video. So for painting, especially with gouache in my sketchbook, so I like to prime the paper with watercolor, and it kind of gives me a easier time planning out the colors, because this one in particular, I feel like it's not as necessary for some of my other spreads where I don't have like a particular color palette in mind, and I paint things very much like what I see is what I paint, if that makes sense. Like if you see an apple that is red, it's gonna be red. But in this case, because the layout for today's little inside cover, instead of doing my OCs, which I think I did for the last 2 sessions, I'm still revisiting the idea of doing another game-themed spread and more focusing on Wanu from 17, just because he's the type that likes to game. There's also very much recent pictures of him wearing, I believe it's like, I'm not a big person, I think it's a league competition, like a championships or something like that, but basically there's an esports team that he likes, and he was wearing the jacket of it because a fan gave it to him during a fan signing, and a lot of people really like that photo because it really suits him. So I wanted to use that as kind of like my inspiration for this page. But I did not want to do anything to do with like computer games or anything like that, because I thought the layout of it would be a little bit more difficult. I had thought that maybe I could potentially do a keyboard layout or something like that in my sketchbook, but I don't have the patience to paint that, so I decided to go with something a little bit simpler, which is kind of like a Game Boy, so very retro, and I decided to keep the palette kind of on the retro side. So the palette that I was going to use was going to be majority kind of like purple and pink, because the ones that I've been seeing on Pinterest at least tend to be that color scheme, but I found one that had more of a, or not exactly retro for this one I guess, but the one that I saw had a very much blue and pink color scheme, and is very vibrant pinks and a very vibrant blue, which isn't quite carrot colors, but pink and blue are basically carrot colors, so I wanted to go with that anyways. So I was using that as a reference. Hopefully I'll put it on screen at some point so you guys can see the color scheme that I was kind of basing this off of. So initially, when I was sketching this out, I was gonna add some flowers and stuff onto the Game Boy or next to it or something like that, which is why I had petals kind of like fluttering in as well. But later on, or not even later on, you can see that where I've painted the shadows for the Game Boy, so kind of like on the surface, I've painted all over the flowers and you can't really see them because I decided last minute that I would just get rid of them all and I would just let that be a drop shadow for the Game Boy. So it looks like it's laying on a surface. We have Walnu in the screen and we have kind of a blue and pink themed spread. So I also have text on the side that says game start, and then I have a loading bar from 0 to 100. So if you remember seeing my initial thumbnails for this spread at the very beginning, the plan is to have game start for the front page instead of like a welcome page or a hello page, which is what I usually like to do. And then for the last page, which would be the opposite spread from this one, I want it to be game over. Even though like that feels very negative, but I feel like it's a little bit fitting because it's like finishing it off kind of in a sense. So I wanted to have game start and game over. And I wanted the text to be more or less consistent. So I'm not too sure if I'm gonna put the game over on the pouch side or on the opposite side where it's kind of like the flat surface. But I also wanted to keep a loading bar. So I thought it'd be cute for me to put 0 to 100 for the loading bar, have one chunk just filled in, and then once we get to the back spread, I'll fill in the entire loading bar to be from, instead of from kind of like 0 to 10%, I'll have it at 100%, meaning that I completed the sketchbook. Now, hopefully I will remember. I haven't counted the signatures in the sketchbook, so I haven't found the halfway point yet, but I'm gonna do that right after this voiceover, and I'm going to maybe leave a little sticky note on that page as well to leave a note for myself for when I actually get there, and make sure to include maybe some kind of loading bar so I can keep it at 50%. They kind of keep the theme running. So I think, yeah, that's basically it concept wise. I do like the fact that I did something a little bit more geometric for this one. In the past, whenever I did like Gamer Walnu, I think there's 2 different ones, but the one that I remember is I did like a bunch of little, I guess they're just pixels, kind of like flying off of him, and he has like a game controller and his headset, and I don't know, it just fits his aesthetic quite a bit. But this one, because I didn't really want him to be the main focus, which is why I didn't really mind making him so tiny and small in this little square, I wanted the main focus to be more or less the text and or the Game Boy itself. So planning out the spread was a little bit difficult for me just because I didn't want to do the Game Boy straight up and down because I didn't want to section it off to one page and have text on one page. I usually like incorporating something that allows the entire spread to be connected somehow instead of segregating it with the seam in the middle. So I wanted to tilt it to the side, which kind of sucks because I would have loved to, if I had the patience to, I guess, include more of the buttons and the button details on it, and it could have been very fun. But I feel like because I'm still trying to ease myself into using gouache again, I didn't feel like super adventurous in terms of playing around with texture or playing around with a lot of detail for this particular piece especially, but maybe for the end page. I don't know if I'm going to hold myself accountable for this, but maybe I'll try my best to push myself a little bit more for that page, even though it's going to have like a very similar layout. Yeah, I think that's about it in terms of the planning and my thoughts and opinions on what exactly I wanted to do for the inside cover page. So usually I like doing like a hello or a welcome page. I know some people do like they label what number sketchbook they're on, or maybe they're stick like stickers on the inside cover and stuff. And I used to stick a bunch of stickers on the inside cover because I used to get sketchbooks from other artists and I never liked placing stickers on top of their artwork. It's just how I am. So I wanted to keep the front cover and the back cover all pristine, and then I would have loaded up on the back and the front like inside covers with a bunch of stickers. But now that I like painting or illustrating something on the inside covers, I haven't been doing that much, and I've accumulated too many stickers. So eventually I will start using them somehow at this point, probably. We'll see. So in terms of the process for this, we have finished doing the watercolors on top of my sketch, and you can see, actually you probably can't see too clearly, but I mentioned this in the previous gouache video where I was doing the last page of my other sketchbook, that I feel like the lead that I've been using, which is like the red one that isn't the Pilot Color ENO version, is a little bit less soluble to water, so I did not do the extra step of kind of doing cleaner, tighter lines of a Pirsmacolor Col-Eraser on top of it, even though it would have been nice for some parts because my paint in general was just covering the sketch because the sketch was fairly light, but I can still see some of the lines for the most part, so I tried my best to block in some of those colors where I could. But after that, I decided to put the gouache down. So in terms of where I started with doing the background for Wonu first because I wanted to make sure that it was kind of more or less one solid color, and then I could paint him on top, and then we'll kind of work our way outwards from that. So I'll probably work on the borders and the rest of the Game Boy and do kind of like the edges, the button, the shadow, everything like that, so I don't really have to worry about doing kind of like the entirety of the Game Boy, then suddenly doing Wonu, and then making sure that I keep him contained. Because at this point, if he has any like excess paint or details that like escape the borders of his screen, I can just cover it up with the blue, hopefully. And I think that would have been the best choice for me, at least. I feel like I always do a terrible job at doing like a hierarchy of starting from general to specific whenever I do painting, especially for something like gouache, where you might want to think about what you paint first because things can be opaque or like, I don't know, just the layering aspect. But for the most part, I had a lot of fun painting the little tiny Wonu, even though he looks a little derpy. I definitely think the glasses will help kind of fill up the space of his face because he looks a little bit zoned out, if anything. But I like how I painted his hair. I didn't do line art once again. I feel like I'm in that stage where I rely on line art a lot and I feel like I benefit from it, but when I do hair, especially for gouache painting, I've been having fun just kind of blocking in the colors for the most part, and hopefully the values are varied enough to the point where you can understand which section of hair is which is kind of like helping with the sense of depth. Hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, I spent a fair amount of time painting Wonu, but I spent a lot of time just blending colors for the Game Boy as well. And I don't know, I think it really helped to have some kind of color palette in mind. I love the color palette of pink and blue, and I usually use purple as like a buffer color in between to allow myself to have a little bit more of a seamless transition. But I'm a little bit wary when it comes to just using straight up pink on top of blue where there's a little bit less blending. So hopefully I did an okay job. I tried my best, if anything, and kind of treated it a little bit like how I do digital painting. So I would place down a lot of blue and then I would take some pink and put it in and slowly blend it out so you can get a new color. And then sometimes I would blend the pink into the blue on my palette and slowly shift it so that we can kind of give a gradual color shift within the object, if that makes sense. I'm trying to apply what I know so that I'm less intimidated whenever I do painting, because I don't know, my confidence for gouache is dwindling, if anything, and I think it's because the less I do it, the less I remember what I like about gouache or the consistency and stuff, or I don't give myself enough patience because I don't like the result right away, which kind of sucks because a lot of painting mediums usually have you go through some kind of ugly phase. I feel like watercoloring is a little bit more forgiving because I mentioned this before, but for watercolor, it's very easy to go light to dark and you can kind of build up your values. But for gouache, sometimes I feel like I'm stuck either in the mid-tone to dark area too much and I don't have enough contrast. But I don't know. I think that'll change over time the more I use it. Because like I said, I'm not going to make any promises on what I want to do in the sketchbook particularly, but I'm going to try, if I can, to paint just a bit more, especially with gouache, because I want to be able to like gouache painting more and more and have that under my belt as an option to be able to paint something that I like without being so hesitant. And it doesn't help that some of the gouache paintings that I've seen in the past of my own, I really, really like. So when I tackle gouache again and I don't get a very similar result, I'm kind of like bummed out because I'm like, I'm regressing. But the reason why I'm regressing is because I'm not doing upkeep or I'm not trying to push myself enough. So yeah, I'm gonna try my best. I'm gonna paint just a bit more, if anything. I'm not gonna give myself like high expectations of what I'm gonna do in the sketchbook because I think that stunted me in my previous one, which kind of sucks, but it's just kind of how it is sometimes. Other than that, I'm trying to think. So timeline wise, today for you guys, I think it might be the 27th. I think. I actually started the sketchbook on the 21st, so it might be the week after you guys have seen this video. Or not after, the week before you guys see this video is when I technically started the sketchbook. And like I mentioned in the sketchbook tour, I am kind of right on time, so I started around some other ones like mid-November, go until April, then it goes April to another mid-November sketchbook, and then it's back to April, and now we're back to mid-November. So we'll see if I finish it faster or I'm a lot slower than like previous sketchbooks. But you can probably expect another sketchbook tour probably next year in April, just because it seems like I'm kind of consistent, especially with the fact that I've been using more or less the same kind of sketchbook for the last 3, I think. There was one other sketchbook that I put in between, which had a lot less pages, which I'm kind of surprised I still took the same amount of time. But yeah, it's kind of like the more I do digital work, the less that I sketch in my sketchbook, or the more I sketch in my sketchbook, the less I work digitally. So it kind of fluctuates a little bit, but hopefully I can kind of keep a good balance again, because one thing I really wanted to do in my previous sketchbook was to build up a sketchbook habit, and I'm still stuck in that state of feeling a little guilty whenever I sketch in my sketchbook and not sketch digitally, because sketching digitally usually means that I'm trying to make usually a finished product or something. So whether or not that's for a video or for like posting to social media, or it's like a gift for somebody, or I don't know, I feel like I always want to post stuff that's presentable, which is a bad mindset. And if you guys prefer seeing like a lot of my either behind the scenes stuff or a lot of sketches and stuff, you can follow me on Threads, because I post literally all my whips on there, I feel like, and I don't really care too much of posting like multiple of the same kind of whip. So if anything, I'm gonna try my best again to try to build up that sketchbook habit, and I want to do at least like maybe an hour before I sleep or something like that, or even just like 30 minutes. But I think it's also doesn't help that when I do sketchbook drawing, instead of doing like one doodle per day, which could be like the size of your thumb kind of doodle, I always like doing an entire spread. And an entire spread, at least, I guess like it depends on the medium and like what I'm doing, but sometimes it takes me like an hour or more than an hour. So maybe that's why I feel like intimidated whenever I have to work in my sketchbook, because I know I have to take a chunk of my time to do that, and it's less freeing for me now. But I want to get back into the mindset that I can treat the sketchbook however I want and draw as little or as much as I would want to without worrying about, oh, is this spread look aesthetic? I should do a full spread, I should keep things consistent and all that jazz, because if anything, it's making me hate my sketchbook a little bit more every time I open it, even though aesthetically sometimes it just looks better. But I'm not saying that I don't like doing like a full spread every time, if that makes sense, because I just enjoy doing that, because visually when I look back, I just like looking at them. So a lot of the time in my previous sketchbook, there was like some spreads near the end where I kind of went back to what I used to like about sketching kind of like full spreads, and sketching like one specific character throughout the entire spread, was playing around with colors and playing around with poses. So I want to do a little bit more studies if I can, and then I don't know, we'll see where my mood takes me in terms of medium wise, because even by saying that I would like to do more painting in my sketchbook, I'm not just saying gouache. I would like to do more watercolor as well, because I keep going back and forth between, oh, watercolor is not reacting the way that I want it to on this paper, therefore I won't use it in the sketchbook. And then the days that I do use watercolor in the sketchbook, I'm usually surprised, being like, oh hey, like I actually like the result of it and I like the look, why haven't I been using it? So in my brain, it feels like I'm tricking myself, being like, hey, it's not watercolor paper, so you shouldn't use it, but you know, don't do that. just use whatever, and if it makes a mess, it makes a mess, so it doesn't really matter. Okay, so for the text for this piece, I did not end up using the acrylic paint markers for the game start text because it did not have the colors that I wanted. So instead, I decided to use this kind of mid-tone darkish blue color for the loading, and then the numbers for the loading bar, just because they are of a smaller, tinier scale. And I did kind of screw it up that 10 on the 100, and I can't think of myself of being the type to be able to do small details in gouache, so I did not trust myself doing that. I can't even do a straight line for the loading bar, so yeah, I'm not gonna chance myself with using a tiny brush with gouache to do any of the lettering. So I did do the lettering for the game start with gouache, and I had a fun time just picking a kind of a blue, a pink, and then mixing a purple in between to let that transition a little bit softer. And I think that worked out kind of well, and I do like the colors a lot. So hopefully I will stick with this color scheme for the back spread as well, so that we can kind of have a consistency between the both of them. So last step, I decided to take a kneaded eraser and erased all the excess little red marks from my pencil, and then I went ahead and kind of did a little bit of detailing with the acrylic pen. So I'm adding Game Boy, but I accidentally put that petal in the wrong spot, so it kind of covered the text. After that, I went ahead and looked in my Ohuhu markers and tried to find something for a drop shadow for the text. So I started off with a very pale purple. I used a little bit of a colorless blender to blend it out a little bit. Then I realized it looked too warm, so I went ahead and chose a more kind of bluish gray to do a deeper drop shadow. So here's my thumbnail, and here's kind of the finished look of the first page, or the inside cover for the sketchbook, which hopefully will set a good tone for the rest of the sketchbook. We'll see. I've already sketched on the next page, which is the back side, because I did thumbnailing, and then I did a little bit of sketches with the fine liners of Wanu just to kind of ease my way and kind of break that first initial page into the sketchbook, because technically I did not work on this first. The thumbnails were first, the doodling was second, and then this thing is basically third. So yeah, that's enough rambling from me today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed watching me do the kind of like front inside cover, or our welcome page in a sense, for the sketchbook. And I really enjoyed the result, so hopefully you guys did too. And I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!